Completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and my job here twice a week is to call out some of the more obvious instances of media bias, and more than anything, to encourage you to question, what else aren't they telling me? Now, some of you, I realize, are joining in for the first time. You've heard about this either through people saying, hey, have you checked this out lately? Or you've heard people say, this guy is absolutely dangerous, and do not listen to whatever he says under any conditions. So I'll leave it up to you to make up your mind. If you find something of value, if you find information that is useful in helping you shape a more informed worldview, I would ask you, please let your friends know, let people know that this is a resource available for people who want to think beyond just simply what legacy media is willing to tell you. Now, if you're one of those people who decides, ooh, this guy is legitimately a nutcase and dangerous, and nobody on earth should be listening, well, then I would think you better tell every single person you know about this program. Seriously, do it. Warn them. Let them know. And by the way, if you have complaints, I'm willing to hear your complaints. I'm willing to give them a fair hearing. I want you to just write them on a $20 bill, send them to me, care of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Thank you. By the way, it's a taxable donation if you're interested. All right. That said, let's talk for a person to serve in public, how hard it is if they are conservative. Case in point, I just saw this video. I'm not going to share the video with you just because it's actually quite long and it's so catty. I mean, someone please get these ladies a saucer of milk. But future superintendent for West Bonner County School District, Brandon Durst, addressed a crowd outside the district office a couple of days ago. He answered a wide array of questions from citizens and priests, accompanied bluntly, and some of these questions were, I think, very reasonable. Some of them were just, this is what struck me. There was this almost irresistible urge, some of the people there who were there clearly as activists, to turn this not into a question and answer, not into a press conference even, but to turn it into a struggle session, which is a favorite tactic of leftists. They just, you have to confess your sins against party dogma. You must confess your sins and how sorry you are, and we will punish you and we will ridicule you until we are good and satisfied with it. But in the end, you must be broken and you must be deconstructed. That's what struggle sessions are all about. Now, I have to give credit to Brandon for not, first of all, for not being antagonistic. He was fielding some extremely antagonistic questions. And it was clear that there were people there who showed up specifically for the purpose of, I'm here to play gotcha, I'm here to make you look bad. He never fell for their game. He never allowed it to become an actual struggle session, though it wasn't for lack of trying on the part of some of these activists out there who were grilling him. See, they seem to have made up their minds that somehow, without any knowledge other than the fact that, well, he worked for the Idaho Freedom Foundation and he does favor freedom and, he's kind of in favor of school choice. And basically the fact that Brandon has some conservative principles, that's enough in their minds to condemn him as an abject failure and absolutely, intolerable. How could we ever allow something like this to happen to our children? Our children, well, our children in the communist sense. So there were a couple of comments that were popping up on Twitter I thought were especially on target. This was one of them. John Grubb said, some people are big mad over Brandon Durst's new pending position as superintendent. So John suggested, since the current system works so well, LOL, why don't you give it 6 to 9 months and see how this district compares to others? Now he says, I'm betting parents will see a big improvement. Okay, I think that's actually fair. And look, I would say this even if this was somebody who was a left-wing superintendent. If they're coming in with new ideas, okay, well, let's see if your ideas pan out. What are they promising? How well do they deliver on their promise? Let's at least give it a chance. No, these ladies were not about to. But Brian Allman, I think, zeroes in on one of the reasons why. It's because this isn't about, we're trying to do what's right by our kids and we just can't afford any new ideas coming in. He says the leftists and their Republican enablers fear that Brandon Durst is going to fail. I mean, they want him to fail, but their fear above that is that he will succeed. I mean, what if he comes in there? What if he shows how conservative principles can actually help the school system? Ooh, that's gonna be a lot harder to explain away. So they're trying to preemptively, well, tell us about how you're going to resign. Put it in right. Tell us exactly the minute that you get word whether you get this provisional, accreditation certificate or not. It all comes down to power, and that is nakedly apparent when you see the anger that some of these activists bring to the table. There's nothing reasoned or rational about what they're doing. And again, I got to give Brandon, some credit here. He stayed reasonable. He refrained from getting sucked into being antagonistic back toward them. And they didn't get the struggle session that they wanted, which really ticked them off. But, somehow I guess we'll all have to find a way to sleep tonight knowing that someone out there is upset because of differing opinions. Wow. What a tragedy. So, North Idaho College has also been in the news quite a bit over the last few months. Now, I'll admit, I have not followed this as closely. There were other more important topics that came up, but I have seen this on the periphery and in the news headlines off and on for really quite some time. And enough that when I hear North Idaho College, I almost immediately associate the words embattled North Idaho College. And my understanding, incomplete as it is that there are some new elected conservative members of the Board of Trustees. But this is a school that apparently has been occupied by hardcore leftists for some time. They cannot abide the idea of someone without their same dogmatic point of view having a place at the table. And so I gotta give credit here to Idaho Tribune for calling them out and pointing out that their mask is slipping. Whoops! Someone should let the North Idaho Republicans, that's a Facebook group, know that their mask is slipping. For those not in the know, that's a fake group of insiders, Democrats, women for Biden, and corrupt ex-representatives that are falsely pretending to be Republicans. So here's some of the evidence to further bear that out. Now, this is kind of hard to see, but here's the Facebook page for North Idaho Republicans, blah, blah, blah. We believe in community and others, lots of words and catchphrases that are designed to give you warm fuzzies and make you think you have something in common with us. Facebook, however, requires some degree of transparency. And over there on the left-hand side, see where that circle is? Friends of NIC, Friends of North Idaho College. Whoa, what? Let's get a little closer look at this. Friends of North Idaho College is responsible for this page. Let's go back here for a second. Which page is it? North Idaho Republicans. So it's not really the North Idaho Republicans that are running that page. It's the Friends of North Idaho College. Let's delve into a little bit about what's behind the Friends of North Idaho College, because this is where it starts to get interesting. Idaho Tribune reports Friends of North Idaho College is a political PAC started by Antifa-connected liberal activists responsible for creating the chaos at North Idaho College board meetings. And by the way, I've seen some of the videos of these. It's ugly stuff. Yeah, I mean, for all the concern over rowdy parents, concerned about, transgender or cross-gender, bathrooms and so forth, or, puerile material in their kids' school libraries, or concern that extremism is on the rise in Idaho. You don't ever hear much in the press about, this kind of extremism. And trust me, it is every bit as ugly as you might imagine it to be. I mean, look at that. Look at that face. I'm sorry. That's the person is not well there. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into some of the folks behind this. That's, by the way, that is an Antifa member, just so we can go back here for a minute, just so you don't think, well, you're picking on this poor woman for her looks. No, I'm picking on her for her politics. The Antifa whisperer follows the Friends of NIC. So delving into this, Save NIC nonprofit founded by Krista Hazel teams up with Antifa to destroy what's left of North Idaho College. Far-left cabal includes journalists and the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, by the way, protects Antifa as well as other left-wing violent causes without hesitation. But in the meantime, they're compiling lists and feeding them to law enforcement. These are the people you need to be watching out for. These are the extremists. These are the hate groups. Yes, groups like Moms for Liberty. Oh, you think I'm kidding? No, that's legitimately what they're doing. So this article is from back in February of this year from the Idaho Tribune. It says North Idaho College has been under attack for the past 3 years. The people who read the Coeur d'Alene press have been led to believe that the threat was coming from North Idaho's grassroots conservative movement, blaming groups like the KCRCC and conservative trustees that were democratically elected to govern the college. As with most of what's reported in the press, nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, the embattled local college has been under liberal occupation for years. And now that these left-wing extremists are losing their grip on the institution, they're doing everything in their power to burn the college to the ground. Sounds like a little microcosm of what we see happening nationally here in America, doesn't it? Screaming, shouting, temper tantrums at board meetings, lawsuits, battery, intimidation, and doxing have all recently become standard practice for the Friends of North Idaho College, who claim their goal is to save NIC from conservatives. But these tactics are not the usual go-tos for elderly wine aunts and cat ladies. These are the tactics of the violent domestic terrorist organization Antifa. In the face of a resolute conservative majority in Kootenai County that elected a majority conservative board in both 2020 as well as 2022, Krista Hazel formed a 501c4 nonprofit called Save NIC to help funnel money toward the liberal attempt to reclaim the board at North Idaho College. Now the nonprofit appears to have teamed up with members of Antifa to cause chaos at the college. So this is Save NIC's Twitter page. These are people that they are actively following. There's Tyler Hurst. I don't know. I'm just seeing some legendary battles between him and his brother Dustin. But let's see who else. We got Luke Malik. We've got NWCCU. Try anywhere else. That's the Antifa whisperer. They follow. They are. Do you think they're just keeping an eye on the Antifa whisperer, or do you think that maybe there's some common ground there? And by the way, imagine if it was a conservative putting out a message like this. Hey, Idaho kids, feeling silenced by a sold-out legislative committee? There's an old trick that gets the attention of any wannabe despot. Molotov cocktails. I don't know. Sounds a lot like a threat, or at least that sounds like a credible kind of threat of violence. But are we supposed to pretend, oh, no, nothing to it? Why, they're just an idea. No such thing. I know the media treats it very differently. You know, any person to the right of Karl Marx is treated as, well, did you hear what they said? They're extremists, to the core. Even the most benign thing can be twisted as an extremist thing. In fact, that was one of the big questions that Mr. Durst, Brandon Durst, was being asked by some of these women. Well, why did you work for the Idaho Freedom Foundation? I mean, they acted like that was just the most terrible thing ever. And that's like being associated with, well, not the commies, because they probably love the commies, but that's like being a member of the Nazi Party or the Aryan Nations. That's how twisted and bent the thinking is. And yet, why do they get that way? I'm thinking for the most part they didn't arrive at that conclusion on their own merits and their own research. It's probably because, let's just say, the press is pretty sympathetic to left-wing causes. Don't believe me? Well, check out this list. The Antifa Whisperer account, which Save NIC follows, is followed by a lot of journalists. These are the journalists who follow the Antifa Whisperer. They include Rebecca Boone from the Associated Press, Christopher Mathias from the Huffington Post, Sally Krutzig from the Idaho Statesman. Oh, look at that. Sarah Miller from the Idaho Statesman, Aaron Sheridan from the Idaho Press, as well as the Daily Beast, Jacob Scholl from the Salt Lake Tribune, formerly of the Idaho Statesman, Doug Locke Smith from Idaho News 6, Sandy Backham from Now This News, documentary filmmaker, and Michael Edison Hayden from the Southern Poverty Law Center. So if you wonder why is there such a uniformity or such a sense of lockstep among so many of these people within legacy media, corporate media, well, there's some evidence that birds of a feather, in fact, do tend to flock together. Shifting gears, let's talk about just the idea that we have to open up the primaries in Idaho. We have to make sure that the Republican primary is open for people who pretend to be something they're not. Which, by the way, would kind of go back to the whole Friends of North Idaho College pretending to be North Idaho Republicans. They're pretending to be something that they're not. Why would they do something like that? Well, I think the obvious answer is because they are power seekers and opportunists, and the goal is to get their hands on power as decisively as they possibly can. So right now, there are members of the Idaho Republican Party that are meeting. I believe they're meeting in Chalice this weekend. High-profile Idaho Republicans speak out against GOP proposals as party leaders gather to vote. Now, these are some rule clarifications that are going to be voted on, and the Idaho GOP State Central Committee will consider these rule changes during their summer meeting. Now, of course, there's kind of an air of, well, that's very suspicious. Look at them meeting to discuss these rules, but part of the rules are to make sure that the party is actually operating as a party and not just, a free-for-all where anybody can come in and start monkeying with the system. And here's the question that is really being addressed by some of these proposed rule changes. This is courtesy of stopidahorhinos.org. Shall the Idaho GOP be governed by those we do not elect? Now, look, if we're supposed to believe elections are somehow sacrosanct, right? So much so we can't even question. Well, an election has happened. Nobody should question it. Unless, of course, somebody like Donald Trump gets elected, then we have to, maintain that it was obviously fraudulent and illegitimate and has to be undone by any means necessary. But, double standards. I apologize for the wall of text, but this lays out some of the reasons why this issue is being addressed. And by the way, one of the primary arguments that Clark Corbin and others reporting on this meeting of GOP leaders is that, well, they're trying to silence young Republicans and other voices. They're trying to take away people's voices in the Republican Party. So here is a response to that claim. I find this pretty convincing. The issue is not about silencing young voters, excluding college Republicans, or taking away the voice of Republican women. Notice how we've got a bunch of different victims groups all being lined up here, just in case. Why the oppressors are trying to silence them? The issue is very simple. Should those the Idaho GOP does not elect decide how our party should be run? Now, currently, the state executive committee includes 7 region chairs elected by region central committees and 7 general officers elected by the state central committee. In addition, the executive committee includes 4 members who we do not elect. They include the appointed state finance chairman, the young Republican state chairman, the president of the Idaho Federation of Republican Women, and the president of the College Republicans. So that makes a total of 18 voting members. Additional non-voting members include the executive director, immediate past state chairman, teenage Republican representative, and representatives of constitutional and congressional officers. Now, the author of this piece says, I don't have an exact count, but there are about 13 to 15 non-voting members who are invited to attend the meetings, ask questions, give opinions and advice, but they do not have the authority to vote. So the only issue under Rule 2023-7 is whether the 4 non-elected but voting members should remain as voting members on the executive committee. They're not being removed from the committee. It's just whether or not, as unelected members, they should still retain that right to vote. Now, this rule was motivated in part by the increase in the number of region chairmen from 7 to 10, starting in 2024, with the addition of 3 region chairmen, all elected by their region central committees. Reduction of the number who sit on the state executive committee as voting members is a wise consideration. Too many chiefs, not enough Indians, right? Perhaps more important is the wisdom of having non-elected club leaders entitled to vote on the state executive committee. Now, the general officers and region chairmen worked hard to get elected to their specific positions, but their votes can be diluted or canceled on the executive committee by those who've never been elected by any central committee of the state or of the regions. And these club presidents will never face those voters and cannot be held accountable for their choices. Do you see the problem? Now, he says, I believe in representative government, but the Idaho GOP has no ability to monitor or provide oversight of these clubs as it does with the counties and regions. So even though he believes in representative government and the 4 members who would move from voting to non-voting status, they still don't represent the state central committee or any region central committee. They're simply not accountable. Look, where there's power, and this is talking about power, accountability has to go hand in hand. There cannot be another way. Mark Fuller, who is the Idaho GOP second vice chair, says, I believe the time has come for the voting members of the state executive committee to include only those actually elected by the state central committee or the region central committees and accountable to those voters. The 3 club presidents and the appointed state finance chairman should retain their positions as ex officio members of the executive committee, but they should not have a vote at the table. Those who decide our policies and spend our money should be subject to our vote and oversight. And he says, I encourage your support for proposed Rule 2023-7. Thanks to each of you for your continued support of conservative Republican principles. You are Idaho. I don't know about you, but that sounds actually pretty reasonable. That doesn't sound like, something that, well, look at them cooking up these backroom deals and just trying to enslave everybody and take away the power of the voters. Although it's very clear there are some people who are taking exactly that approach. So let's take a quick look at this. Is the most recent Substack essay from Brian Allman from the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Bitter Rhetoric, a response to Mary Souza. Now, Mary had a column recently published in the Coeur d'Alene Press. Holy cow. That is one bitter ex-politician. And it's so interesting to see how she focuses that bitterness on, well, anybody else who's doing this is, they're just in it for themselves, or they're mindless drones who do only what they're told. And yet Brian does a very good job of deconstructing all of the falsehoods that she promotes in her column. I really recommend, if you haven't subscribed to his gemstate.substack.com, you really should. So Mary's article is titled, It's a Small Club and You're Not in It. She's trying to paraphrase George Carlin. Dear Idaho Republican citizens, so sorry to interrupt your summer activities, but you need to pay attention to some scary rules and resolutions designed to take away your rights. Now, Brian Allman points out here, scary? Well, look, she's already told you how you're supposed to feel before actually giving you any information. Here's another example. They will be voting on some controversial rules and resolutions so contentious they were held over from the Idaho GOP's winter meeting. These issues are still highly problematic, but are now out of the spotlight as you and I are trying to enjoy our summer while already distracted by the national furor going on in D.C. and Florida. Now, Brian Allman points out, notice her framing. You and I, by the way, that's a con man technique of building rapport and trying to build trust. Well, you and I, we make a pretty good team, don't we? Huh? That's snake oil you're being sold. We're just trying to enjoy our summer. We're the same, you and me. If you've ever seen Falling Down, you'll understand that reference. You and I. But those evil Idaho Republicans are engaging in controversial, contentious, and problematic things. You see what's happening here? There's a lot to this article, and Brian goes through it point by point. He really does a masterful job of deconstructing Mary Souza's arguments, and I'm sorry, she needs to be deconstructed on these. She needs to be challenged, and I really hope that she finds a point where she finds enough peace that she can stop living on well, I was a legislator too, and everybody who doesn't listen to me is somehow evil and out to control everybody else. It's sad. There's no building. There's nothing productive that's coming from her. It's just, I have to tear down whatever's being done, starting with anybody who is standing for freedom or standing for limited government or fiscal responsibility. What an interesting turn of events, and what a sad situation for her to find herself in. Look, I got to confess, I think that political power is probably the worst dynamic by which to conduct our interactions with other people. And sadly, there are people out there who believe that it should be the basis. It should be the dynamic behind every human interaction we have is, establishing who has the political power in this situation. We've all seen these kind of people. They are not pleasant to be around. They're control freaks. They want control of other people. Now, I'm much more of a mindset of, look, live and let live. Anything peaceful ought to be on the table, which means leave people alone. Don't target them. Don't target their kids. Stop pushing stuff in their face. Great. Happy Pride Month to you. And maybe by 2030, we'll have a pride flag planted on the moon. But, most of us just want to go on living our lives without having to be, forcibly brought into this cult of everybody thinks the same way. Everybody thinks with perfect uniformity. That is not synonymous with a free society. That's the mark of a totalitarian society, and that's why we push back. Now, I admire people like Brian Allman who can push back, firmly but gently. And he is probably one of the most diplomatic writers that I know. So I strongly recommend. I get a little bit caught up in passion from time to time, and I try not to, but still happens. Oh well. So my advice is be very careful when you're reading or viewing what is being presented to you by legacy media. I'm not telling you should trust me instead. I'm the only one who can tell you what's going on. Nope. I'm saying you need to trust yourself. You need to be willing to engage in what's known as heuristic learning, which is you are out there seeking the truth and discovering the truth on your own. Now, its counterpart, the polar opposite, is eristic learning. That's basically learning to twist words and phrases because you're trying to achieve a victory more so than find truth. Brian Holmes from KTVB is a perfect example of this. So smug, that means somebody wrote him an email saying, criticizing him. I don't like you. You're a duty head or whatever. It was not a neighborly thing. And would a person in a position of power and confidence in their position then out that and try to expose that person? Come, everybody, come ridicule this man. He has questioned me. No. Nope. That's a person who's approaching situations from a very eristic kind of viewpoint. He's not interested in truth. He just wants to win. He wants those gotcha points. So for you and I to be informed, for us to be effective, that means we have to be heuristic learners, studying things out for ourselves, reading original books. I saw as I was browsing, through some of the information today, there was a great letter to the editor in the Idaho Statesman about, history shouldn't teach children to love or hate their country. It should prepare them to live in it. And, people were flipping out about that. Well, I don't want them teaching them to be patriotic. I don't want to be teaching them this or that. Look, do you want to learn history? There's a truth you're going to have to accept. And it's first of all this. Any history class you take in a government school or a government-funded school, even if it's just taking taxpayer money to help out, it's going to have a favorable representation of whoever's in power. How could it not, right? Who's signing the checks? You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Well, of course, this is always the way it's supposed to be and the best it's ever been. And if you really want to learn, you got to be willing to read old books, meaning you got to read original sources, preferably written by people who lived through the times or the events that you are trying to learn about. Now, are there things that they will be wrong about or places where their knowledge will be incomplete? Absolutely. And hopefully you're humble enough to recognize, but we're in the very same position. We have our blind spots and there are things that we don't understand very well. So, maybe cut them a little bit of slack, but if you really want to see what was going on in people's minds, that's the way you do it. You don't wait for some professor to tell you, well, according to my thoughts and my research, this is what I think that they were thinking. He knew that she thought he was a fool. Oh, wow, you're like 3 degrees into somebody's head and guessing. You want to find out for yourself, you got to be willing to dig and learn for yourself. So here's one more cautionary tale. I know a lot of people, myself included, were kind of focused on this submersible that went down to view the wreck of the Titanic and inadvertently became a part of that wreckage. But would it surprise you to know that the U.S. Navy knew since Sunday afternoon that vessel had been destroyed? But there was no official word on it. They let it clog the news feed all week long, diverting our attention away from things like, J.P. Morgan deleting emails, or Joe Biden's impeachment, or Pentagon misallocation of Ukraine funds, billions of taxpayer funds to Ukraine, rather. Hunter Biden's charges. Hunter Biden sitting on a phone call telling someone in China, you better come up with the money you promised, or my dad's going to make things happen. Or the John Durham congressional hearing. That's the other thing we have to watch out for. If you do, partake of mainstream news, you're going to have to figure out how to see through the smokescreen. One other final thought here, and again, this has to. I don't know whether to congratulate or just shake my head at the Statesman, but I do tip my hat to Kevin Reichert for saying, the Statesman's kind of stretching the definition of entertainment. With the Titanic missing, submarine updates, debris found as passengers confirmed dead. Why would they put that in the entertainment section? I have no idea, but it seems like kind of a curious oversight. But then again, maybe they're telling the truth. It really was a form of entertainment for a lot of people in terms of it was keeping us occupied. It was keeping our attention. Everybody's sitting on the edge of our seats. And yet officially it was known as early as Sunday afternoon that the vessel was destroyed. Got to use your noggin. Got to be on your guard. People will try to deceive you. And it's on you to figure out how and when and why and not fall prey to what they're trying to do. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.